The first gunshot echoed through Westfield Shopping Center at 2:47 p.m. on a busy Saturday afternoon. Shoppers screamed and ran in panic as three armed men stormed through the main entrance. But while everyone else fled in terror, Maria Santos, a quiet security guard who'd worked there for 2 years, did something that shocked everyone watching the security cameras. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she began moving with the precise, calculated movements of someone who had faced gunfire before. Maria had been standing near the information desk when she heard the distinctive crack of automatic weapons fire. While other security guards dove for cover and shoppers stampeded toward the exits, she immediately dropped to a tactical crouch and began assessing the situation with the cold calculation of a trained soldier. 3 attackers, semi-automatic weapons, moving in formation through the main corridor. Approximately 200 civilians in immediate danger. For 3 years, Maria Santos had worked hard to forget these kinds of calculations. She'd traded her combat boots for comfortable sneakers, her tactical vest for a simple security uniform, her M4 rifle for a radio and a clipboard. She'd built a quiet life in suburban Seattle, far from the battlefields of Afghanistan, where she'd earned her reputation as one of the most effective special operations commanders in her unit. But old instincts die hard. "This is Security 1, she spoke into her radio, her voice calm and authoritative in a way that made the mall's security dispatcher sit up straight. "We have an active shooter situation. 3 suspects armed with automatic weapons entering through the main entrance. Initiate lockdown protocol immediately." The dispatcher's voice cracked through the static. "Maria, we don't have an active shooter protocol. We're supposed to call 911 and—" "Listen to me carefully," Maria interrupted, already moving toward a better position. "Lock down all store security gates. Direct all civilians to the north and east emergency exits. Keep them low and quiet. Do not use the main corridors. And get me a direct line to whoever's commanding the first responder units." "Maria, you're just security. You can't—" "Do it now," she commanded, and something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Maria moved through the mall with purpose, using the service corridors she'd memorized during her first week on the job. Most people thought she was just being thorough when she'd mapped every exit, every blind spot, every potential choke point in the building. The truth was, old habits from her military days died hard. She'd always been the type of soldier who planned for the worst-case scenario. Now, the worst-case scenario was happening. Through her earpiece, she could hear chaos. Store employees were panicking, customers were screaming, and the 3 gunmen were moving systematically through the mall, firing randomly into storefronts. But Maria also heard something else, the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and controlled. This was familiar territory, even if the battlefield had changed from Afghan mountains to American retail space. She reached the mall security office and quickly accessed the camera system. The monitors showed her what she needed to know. The attackers were moving in a coordinated pattern, suggesting military or paramilitary training. They weren't random shooters. They had a plan. "Security dispatch, this is Santos. Are you getting feeds from cameras 7, 12, and 15? "Yes, but Maria, the police are saying—" "The police aren't here yet," Maria cut her off. "I am. Now listen carefully. The suspects are moving in a tactical formation toward the food court. They're herding civilians into a kill zone. We need to redirect the evacuation flow." She pulled up the mall's emergency systems on her computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Most security guards barely knew how to operate the basic functions. Maria had spent her first month learning every system, every override, every emergency protocol the mall had. Because in Afghanistan, knowledge of your operating environment was the difference between life and death. "Attention all store personnel. she announced over the mall's PA system, her voice echoing through the corridors with calm authority. "This is Security Command. Implement immediate shelter-in-place procedures. Secure all customers in your back rooms, away from windows and main entrances. Emergency services are en route. Repeat, shelter in place. Do not attempt to evacuate through main corridors." On the security monitors, she watched as store employees began following her instructions. Victoria's Secret pulled their gates down and moved customers to the stockroom. The Apple Store staff guided people behind the service counter. Barnes & Noble employees led customers to the storage area in the back. But she also saw something that made her blood run cold. A group of teenagers trapped in the GameStop near the food court, directly in the path of the advancing gunmen. Maria grabbed her radio. "Mall dispatch, I need you to contact GameStop immediately. Tell them to move everyone to the storage room and barricade the door." "Trying to reach them now," came the reply, "but their phone's going straight to voicemail." Through the cameras, Maria watched the gunmen getting closer to the electronics section. The teenagers in GameStop were huddled behind the counter, clearly visible to anyone entering the store. They had maybe 2 minutes before the attackers reached them. Maria made a decision that would change everything. She left the security office and began moving through the service corridors toward GameStop. Her hand instinctively reached for where her sidearm would have been during her military days, but found only empty space. Security guards at Westfield weren't armed, a policy that had seemed perfectly reasonable until 3 minutes ago. But Maria Santos hadn't survived 5 combat deployments because of her weapons. She'd survived because of her mind. She reached the service entrance behind GameStop and quietly entered through the stockroom. Inside, she found 6 teenagers and 2 young employees, all cowering behind the sales counter as gunfire grew louder in the corridor outside. "Everyone, listen to me," she said, her voice low but commanding. "I'm mall security. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly." One of the employees, a college-aged kid named Tyler, looked up at her with terror in his eyes. "They're coming this way. We can hear them talking." Maria listened. Through the store's entrance, she could indeed hear voices, calm, coordinated, tactical communications between the attackers. These weren't amateurs. "Okay," she said, quickly assessing the situation. "Here's what we're going to do. There's a service corridor behind the stockroom that leads to the north emergency exit. We're going to move there in 2 groups. First group, you 4, with Tyler leading. Stay low, stay quiet, move fast. When you reach the exit, keep going until you're at least 2 blocks away." "What about us?" asked one of the remaining teenagers. "You're coming with me in 30 seconds. We need to make sure the first group has a clear path." Through the store's security gate, Maria could see movement. The attackers were close now, checking each store systematically. She had to time this perfectly. She waited, counting seconds, listening to the pattern of footsteps and voices outside. In Afghanistan, this kind of tactical patience had saved her unit countless times. The ability to wait for exactly the right moment, even when every instinct screamed at you to move. "First group, go, now." Tyler led 4 teenagers through the stockroom toward the service corridor. Maria watched them disappear into the hallway, then turned her attention back to the store entrance. The footsteps were directly outside now. "Second group, get ready," she whispered to the remaining 2 teenagers. "When I say move, you go straight to that corridor. Don't look back, don't hesitate." Through the store's security gate, she saw a shadow pass by the entrance. One of the attackers was right outside, scanning the store. Maria pressed herself against the wall, calculating angles and timing. That's when she heard something that made her heart skip. The distinctive sound of someone testing the store's security gate. The attackers weren't just randomly shooting.
They were checking which stores were properly secured and which might still have people inside. The gate rattled slightly. Through a gap in the security barrier, Maria could see a figure in dark clothing examining the lock mechanism.
She had seconds to make a choice that would determine whether the people under her protection lived or died. Maria Santos had been making those kinds of choices since she was 22 years old, leading special operations missions in hostile territory. She'd learned that sometimes the best defense was an unexpected offense. Moving with complete silence, she positioned herself near the gate. When the gunman leaned closer to examine the lock, she struck. Her hand shot through the gap in the security gate, grabbing the attacker's weapon and yanking it hard toward her. The sudden movement caught him completely off guard, and for a crucial moment, his grip on the rifle loosened. But Maria wasn't trying to disarm him completely. That would have been impossible from her position. Instead, she was creating a distraction, a moment of confusion that would give her the advantage she needed. As the gunman stumbled forward, trying to regain control of his weapon, Maria shouted to the teenagers behind her, "Move, now!" They ran for the service corridor as Maria continued to struggle with the attacker through the gate. She couldn't see his face, but she could tell from his movements and reactions that he was trained, military or paramilitary background, just as she'd suspected. But he wasn't expecting to face someone with her level of experience. Using a technique she'd learned during close-quarters combat training, Maria twisted the rifle barrel in a way that made it impossible for the gunman to aim properly, while simultaneously putting pressure on his trigger finger. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, the sound echoing through the store. "Contact! Contact!" she heard him shout to his companions. "Store 7, resistance encountered." Maria released her grip on the weapon and immediately moved away from the gate. She'd bought the teenagers time to escape, but now she'd also revealed her position. The other attackers would be converging on GameStop within minutes. She needed to move. But as she turned toward the service corridor, she heard something that stopped her cold. A child's voice, crying from somewhere deeper in the mall. Through her radio, static-filled reports were coming in throughout the building. Store employees sheltering in place, customers trapped in restrooms, security guards who'd barricaded themselves in the administrative offices. But underneath it all, she could hear that child crying. Maria's training told her to evacuate, to get out while she still could. The logical tactical decision was to withdraw and let the incoming police handle the situation. But Maria Santos had never been the kind of soldier who left anyone behind. She keyed her radio. "Security dispatch, I need a status report on all civilians in the building. Are we sure everyone's been accounted for?" "Negative, Maria. We're getting scattered reports."
Some stores aren't responding, and there are reports of people trapped in the restrooms near the food court. The food court, where the gunmen were heading. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of command responsibilities settling on her shoulders. In Afghanistan, this feeling had kept her awake for months. The knowledge that every decision she made would determine who lived and who died. She'd retired from military service because she thought she was done carrying that weight. Apparently, she was wrong. "Dispatch, this is Santos. I'm going to attempt to reach the trapped civilians in the food court area." "Maria, absolutely not. Your security, not tactical response. The police will be here soon." "Soon isn't good enough," Maria replied, already moving through the service corridors toward the sound of gunfire. "People are trapped, and those shooters are moving systematically. If we wait for backup, we're going to lose civilians." She moved through the maze of back hallways that most mall employees didn't even know existed. During her first week on the job, she'd explored every inch of the building's infrastructure, partly out of professional habit, partly because old military instincts told her to always know her terrain. Now, those instincts were paying off. Through the walls, she could hear the attackers communicating with each other. Their voices were calm, professional, coordinated. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a planned operation with specific objectives. But what were they really after? Maria reached a service door that opened near the food court and carefully peered through the small window. What she saw made her stomach turn. 3 families with young children huddled behind the counter of a frozen yogurt shop, completely exposed to anyone entering the food court from the main corridor. The gunmen were 2 stores away and moving closer. She keyed her radio one more time. "Dispatch, I need you to contact the frozen yogurt palace in the food court. Tell them to move everyone into the walk-in freezer. It's the only hardened position in that area." "Maria, where are you? Your radio signal is weak." "I'm doing what needs to be done." Maria opened the service door and moved into the food court area, keeping low and using the scattered tables and chairs for cover. The area was eerily quiet, except for the sound of distant gunfire and muffled crying from the yogurt shop. She reached the store and slipped behind the counter, where she found exactly what she'd seen on the cameras. 2 families with 4 young children, plus 2 teenage employees, all terrified and completely unprepared for what was happening. "A mall security," she said quietly, causing several people to jump. "We need to move you to a safer location." One of the mothers, a woman in her 30s holding a toddler, looked at her with desperate eyes. "We can't get out. They're in the hallway. We heard shooting." "I know," Maria said calmly. "But staying here isn't safe either. There's a walk-in freezer in the back of this store. It has thick walls and a lock that can be secured from the inside. You'll be protected there until police arrive." "But it's cold," one of the children whimpered. Maria smiled gently. "Cold is better than dangerous, and it's only temporary." She began moving the families toward the back of the store, but as they reached the freezer door, she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps in the food court, moving with tactical precision. The attackers had reached their location. Maria quickly ushered everyone into the walk-in freezer. "Lock this door behind me," she whispered to one of the fathers. "Don't open it for anyone except police with proper identification." "Where are you going?" the mother with the toddler asked. Maria checked her radio and realized she still had connection to the mall's security system. Through her earpiece, she could hear updates from throughout the building. More stores securing their customers, emergency services arriving at the perimeter, and the slow, methodical progress of the gunmen through the mall. "I'm going to buy you time," she said simply. She sealed the freezer door and heard the lock engage from inside. Now she just had to make sure the attackers never made it that far. Maria moved back toward the front of the yogurt shop, but instead of hiding, she began rearranging the space. Using tables, chairs, and display equipment, she created what military tacticians call a fatal funnel, a narrow corridor that would force anyone entering the store to move in a predictable pattern, giving her maximum advantage despite being outnumbered and outgunned. In Afghanistan, she'd used similar tactics to protect her unit during building clearances. The principle was simple: control the space, control the engagement. She could hear voices now, just outside the food court. The attackers were communicating about their next move. From their radio chatter, she could tell they were following a predetermined plan, but they were also adapting to unexpected resistance. They'd expected to encounter only terrified civilians and minimally trained security. They hadn't planned on facing someone with actual combat experience. Maria positioned herself behind an overturned table that gave her a clear view of the store's entrance while providing some protection. Then she did something that would have surprised anyone who knew her as the quiet, friendly security guard. She began psychological warfare.
This is mall security to unknown armed subjects. You are surrounded by law enforcement and have no avenue of escape. Surrender your weapons and exit the building immediately. It was a complete bluff. Police were still several minutes away, but Maria knew from experience that uncertainty was a weapon. If she could make the attackers doubt their intelligence about the mall's security capabilities, she might be able to disrupt their timeline and save lives. The voices outside stopped. She'd gotten their attention. Through the store's entrance, she saw movement, someone in dark clothing positioning themselves for a better view of the yogurt shop. The attackers were now focused on her location, which meant they weren't moving through the rest of the mall toward other civilians. Mission accomplished. But now came the hard part, staying alive long enough for real backup to arrive. Maria's radio crackled. Security 1, this is dispatch. Police units are entering the building. ETA to your location approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes? In combat time, that was an eternity. Copy, dispatch. Be advised, I have multiple civilians secured in a hardened position. Do not approach the food court until the area is cleared. Maria, what's your status? Are you safe? Maria looked at the entrance to the yogurt shop, where she could now see the barrel of a rifle being positioned for a potential shot. She thought about the families locked in the freezer behind her, the teenagers she'd helped escape from GameStop, and all the other people throughout the mall who were counting on someone to keep the attackers busy until help arrived. I'm exactly where I need to be, she said into the radio. Then she turned off her radio, took a deep breath, and prepared to do what she'd done so many times before in places far from home, hold the line until backup arrived, no matter the cost. The first shot shattered the yogurt shop's front window, sending glass cascading across the floor. Maria didn't flinch. She'd been expecting it. Instead, she used the sound to mask her own movement as she shifted to a better position behind the counter. "Federal agents, come out with your hands visible," she shouted, continuing her psychological campaign. It was another bluff, but uncertainty was her only weapon now. The shooting stopped for a moment. Through the broken window, she could hear heated discussion among the attackers. They were realizing that whatever intelligence they had about the mall's security capabilities was incomplete. Maria used the pause to key her radio one more time. "Dispatch, tell the responding officers that the subjects are trained military or paramilitary. They're using tactical formations and coordinated communications. This isn't random violence. It's a planned operation." But even as she provided intelligence to the incoming officers, Maria knew the most important thing she could do was keep the attackers focused on her location. Every minute they spent trying to neutralize her was a minute they weren't threatening other civilians.
In Afghanistan, they'd called it taking point, being the person who walked into danger first so others could follow safely. Maria Santos had always been good at taking point. The second wave of gunfire was more concentrated, more precise. The attackers had identified her position and were trying to flush her out. But Maria had chosen her defensive position carefully, using the yogurt shop's commercial equipment to create multiple layers of protection. She waited, counting seconds, listening to the pattern of fire. When there was a pause for reloading, she moved to a different position, always staying between the attackers and the freezer where the families were hidden. Her radio crackled with updates. "All units, suspects contained in food court area, tactical teams moving to secure perimeter." Almost there. She just had to hold on a little longer. But then she heard something that changed everything. The sound of the freezer door being opened from inside. "No," she whispered, turning to see one of the fathers peeking out, apparently trying to see what was happening. "Get back inside," she hissed. But it was too late. Through the broken window, one of the attackers had seen the movement near the freezer. Now they knew exactly where the civilians were hidden. Maria had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether the families she'd protected would live or die. The attackers were trying to reach the freezer, and from her current position, she couldn't stop them. Unless she did something that went against every tactical principle she'd ever learned. Unless she gave up her defensive position and went on the attack.
Maria Santos had spent 3 years trying to forget the feeling of making life or death decisions under fire. But as she heard the sound of children crying from the freezer and boots moving across broken glass toward their location, she remembered exactly why she'd been so good at it. Some things were worth the risk. She moved out from behind the counter, exposing herself to draw the attacker's attention away from the freezer. It was the kind of decision that separated real soldiers from people who just wore the uniform. "Over here," she shouted, making herself a target. "You want someone trained? You got me." The gunfire immediately shifted in her direction, exactly as she had planned. But now she was in the open, with limited cover, and no weapon except her training and experience. Just like the old days. Maria moved through the yogurt shop like someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of staying alive in hostile territory. She used every piece of equipment, every angle, every shadow to stay one step ahead of the gunfire. But more importantly, she kept the attackers focused on her and away from the families in the freezer. Through the chaos, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world. "Seattle police, building is surrounded." Real backup had finally arrived.
The attackers heard it too. Through the broken window, she could see them repositioning, realizing their operation was compromised. They had to choose, continue trying to eliminate her, or attempt to escape. They chose escape. As the three gunmen withdrew from the food court, Maria finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd done it. She'd bought enough time for the police to respond, and she'd kept the civilians safe. But as the adrenaline faded, she realized something else. Her carefully constructed new life as Maria Santos, quiet security guard, was over. Too many people had seen her in action. Too many questions would be asked. Her radio crackled. "Security 1, this is Incident Command. What's your status?" Maria looked around the destroyed yogurt shop, then at the freezer where 7 people were alive because she'd remembered how to be a soldier when it mattered. "All civilians secure. Area is clear for medical response." "Copy that. Outstanding work, Santos. Command wants to debrief you immediately." Maria turned off her radio and sat down among the broken glass and overturned furniture. In a few minutes, this place would be filled with police, federal agents. They'd want to know how a mall security guard had coordinated a tactical response that saved dozens of lives. They'd want to know who she really was. For 3 years, Maria had worked hard to be nobody special, just another face in the crowd, another person trying to build a quiet life away from the chaos of her past. But sometimes, Maria thought, as she heard sirens getting closer, being nobody special wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to remember who you used to be. 2 hours later, Maria sat in the mall's administrative office, facing a group of people she'd hoped never to encounter again. Federal agents, military investigators, and police detectives who specialized in cases involving former Special Operations personnel. "Miss Santos," said Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI, "your actions today were extraordinary, but they also raise some questions about your background and qualifications." Maria looked at the assembled officials. She could continue the deception, claim she'd just gotten lucky, maintain the cover identity she'd built so carefully, or she could tell the truth. "My name is Colonel Maria Santos, United States Army Special Operations Command. I retired 3 years ago after serving 5 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq." The room fell silent. Agent Walsh leaned forward. "Colonel Santos, according to our records, you're supposed to be dead." "I know. That was the arrangement." Over the next hour, Maria told them the story she'd never told anyone, the classified mission that had gone wrong, the decision to fake her death to protect ongoing operations, the new identity she'd been given in exchange for her silence about what she'd seen. She had been supposed to disappear forever, to live quietly under her assumed name and never use her military skills again. But today had proved that some things were more important than staying hidden. "So what happens now?" asked Detective Sarah Kim from Seattle PD. Maria looked out the window at the mall, where emergency vehicles were still clearing the scene. Paramedics were treating people for shock and minor injuries, but there were no fatalities among the civilians. The 3 attackers had been captured during their attempted escape. "Now I guess I find out if saving American lives on American soil is worth breaking my cover," Maria said. Agent Walsh closed her file. "Colonel Santos, as far as the FBI is concerned, your actions today demonstrate exactly the kind of leadership and capability this country needs. We'd be honored to discuss opportunities for you to serve again, officially this time." That evening, Maria stood in her small apartment, looking at the simple life she'd built as a security guard. The photos on her refrigerator of mall co-workers at holiday parties, the comfortable furniture she'd bought piece by piece, the books about gardening and cooking that represented her attempt to become someone peaceful. Her phone rang. It was Tyler, the young man from GameStop. "Miss Santos, I just wanted to thank you again. You saved our lives today." "You're welcome, Tyler. How are you holding up?" "Better now, but I keep thinking about what you did, how you knew exactly what to do, how you kept everyone calm. That wasn't just security guard training, was it?" Maria smiled. "No, Tyler, it wasn't." "Who are you really?" Maria looked at herself in the mirror across the room. For 3 years, she'd seen a woman trying to forget her past, but today, she saw someone who'd remembered her purpose. "I'm someone who believes that protecting innocent people is worth any risk," she said. "And I'm someone who's just realized that you can't run away from who you really are." A week later, Colonel Maria Santos stood in a Pentagon briefing room wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 3 years. The medal ceremony was small, classified, attended only by the officials who knew the truth about her identity and her actions. But as she accepted the commendation for her courage at Westfield Shopping Center, Maria thought about the real victory. 7 families who went home safe that day because someone remembered how to be a soldier when it mattered most. She was no longer Maria Santos, the quiet security guard. She was Colonel Maria Santos again, and she was ready to serve. The mall attack had ended her hiding, but it had also given her back her purpose. And sometimes, Maria realized, that's exactly what heroism looks like. Not choosing to be brave, but choosing to be who you really are when people need you most.